Welcome back to the Main Street TV Local Sports Break. Hi, I'm your host, Ralph Miranda. Well, we're going to visit with Coach Derek Hunt as we do each and every week. The Rebels coming off a tough 21-14 defeat at the hand of the West Rebels, West, the defending state 5A champions. We'll talk to Coach Hunt about that game. They played a very tough game, Maryville, a very physical football game. It was close the whole way. But again, West is very sound, both offensively and defensively, especially defensively. And they were able to come out ahead 21-14. So we'll recap that game with Coach Hunt. We'll talk a little bit about some of his players, the guys that did exceptionally well in the game Friday night. As always, injuries bit the Rebels again. We had another guy go out. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about some of the challenges that he's got, putting new guys in on the fly and getting them ready and finding out what it is that they're good at so that they can scheme correctly against their opponents. And then we'll wrap up as we do each week, talking about the upcoming opponent this week. The Rebels will play Science Hill at home. Science Hill, a regular season opponent for Maryville the past few years, and usually a regular playoff opponent in one of the first three rounds. So we'll talk about Science Hill, all that and more on the Main Street TV Local Sports Break. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Main Street TV Local Sports Break. Hi, I'm your host, Ralph Miranda. We're joined again by the head football coach of the Maryville Rebels, Coach Derek Hunt. Derek, tough game last Friday night. The West Rebels come into your stadium. They are the defending state 5A champions. Very good football team. You guys played them toe to toe, but came in on the short end of a 21-14 score. So take us through the game a little bit, kind of the way it unfolded, and then some of the plays that you thought were kind of key to the outcome.
Yeah, so they're, like you said, a really good football team, and they do such a great job doing what they do.
Right.
They're not flashy necessarily. They have good players. They have great coaches. They do what they do, and they do it well. And we knew it was going to be a tough game. Our kids played really hard. I was super proud of that. Defense played outstanding, giving us chances to win for sure. Offensively, kind of the same story as the Bradley game in that we were able to move the football, but we weren't able to capitalize on some opportunities that we had once we crossed the 50. We did make some big plays, made a big play late in the game that cut it to one score, and was going to get the ball back. I actually had the ball, I think, with 4 minutes to go with a chance to tie, and punted. Still had 3 timeouts left, so we got it back, or we got a stop. Defense came up again, and then we fumbled a punt return, and they fell on it for the game. So I would not be surprised if they are the defending 5A state champs. If they're not, they'll be right there in the thick of it.
Yeah.
But we with the adversity that our team has faced in this early season so far, I could not be prouder of the job that our kids are doing and our coaches are doing. And I haven't heard, I know it's out there, but I haven't heard myself the negativity. And I think our kids still believe. And without question, everything that we've set out to do this year is still before us. So we've just got to keep working to get better, keep sticking together. That's a big thing. Not letting anybody step in between that.
Right. No, that's important. And I think too, it's hard from a Maryville perspective, from a fan perspective, who they really don't know what's going on, inside the lines, obviously, and what happens in the locker room. But people at Maryville have gotten spoiled, and I think, just because you lose a couple games doesn't mean you've had a bad season, and sometimes people forget that, it's very hard to go undefeated in any level of football, and they forget that. West High School, I noticed, kind of looking at the tape, their defense was very sound. I noticed that they blitzed you a couple times off the. I guess I don't know if they called him an outside linebacker or what their name for that person is, but I know they blitzed him a couple times, which put your quarterback in a situation where I guess maybe either he wasn't expecting it or had to get rid of the ball quickly. And I thought their linebackers played exceptional, especially on that goal line stand. I think it was in the third quarter.
Yeah.
But anyway, so talk a little bit about that and some of the things their defense did, which made it tough on you as a play caller.
So their linebackers are their best part of their defense for sure, especially number 15. He is a phenomenal football player, and he was the same phenomenal football player for him last year. So we kind of knew what we were in for. They had a couple D linemen that were really tough to block as well. We had to start a couple sophomores on the offensive line due to some injury, and so we were inexperienced with a place where we thought we would have experience come back. One of the lone places,
right?
It turned out we were in this game. We were pretty inexperienced and green. Those kids played hard. We certainly made some mistakes though.
Yeah.
And, I thought this was the first game that our Graham Coulter had started at quarterback for us. After Casey Cobble's injury. And so, we were green pretty much everywhere on offense, and so it's been tough, honestly, to find some footing. And like I said, we've done some really good things. I think you kind of see what we're capable of if we can be consistent and execute. But that's going to take time with guys who are just getting experience. They're learning, they're gaining experience. As coaches, we're learning what they're really good at. And here we are again. I think I told you last week or the week before, it feels like every week is week one all over again because we're starting with a new slate of kids, and then Friday night we lose Zeke McCoy, who's our starting receiver and safety, punt returner. So he'll miss quite a bit of time with a knee. And so, it's been one of those things, and I credit our kids for continuing to fight. They're not giving up. It's very disappointing. It's just like, golly, when does it end? But West defense caused us a lot of problems because of how physical and fast that they ran to the football. We were able to make some plays. I thought Britton Barrett had a really good game at receiver. And Coulter certainly made some good throws. And I thought Price Davis ran hard the times that we were able to block him up.
Yeah, no, you mentioned number 15, and as an old linebacker, I guess my eyes kind of gravitate to that position. And I noticed that when you guys were down on the goal line and you had a couple fourth down plays, I think one play you and I don't know what you call this play, but the quarterback kind of fakes a little pitch out and then he takes it himself, and he gained about 6 yards. But the next time you tried that, 15 was right there. He wasn't fooled that time, and he played it really well. So yeah, you can tell their defense is well coached and aggressive and an attacking type defense. So let's switch over to their offense. I noticed that you guys, as you said, the defense played exceptionally well. I mean, I didn't notice anything that really stood out to me, but they had a couple big plays. I mean, the touchdown pass they threw was a big play, and then they had a couple other big runs. But all in all, what are some of the things that their offense did that maybe gave you a little bit of difficulty or that maybe you might not have been ready for?
Yeah, so they were able to hit us over the middle a couple times, and that's one thing that is always a cause for concern when you got a team that can run the football.
Correct.
They pretty much stay in 11 personnel. They don't really change who they are. They use that big, strong fullback, H-back to run their gap scheme stuff. They love running buck and counter and power, and that's what they hang their hat on. They don't really fool around with any zone type runs. That's who they are. And they're good at it. And they're good at it. And if you try to fool with your techniques and alignment on the defensive line to stop power, then they're going to run buck.
Right.
And if you try to stop buck, then they're going to run power counter. So it's a good. They've meshed that very well together. And when they are good at what they do, which is the last 2 years they've been good at it for sure, it's hard to stop.
Yeah,
it's hard to stop, and you about have to sell out to stop it, which then gives you some space over the middle.
Yeah.
And so that was the toughest part, was just trying to call it right. And I thought Coach Cobble, Coach White did a great job. feeling the game.
Right.
We put our kids in some positions to make plays, and Zeke had an interception, and Hutton Jones had an interception, and those were two big plays in the game.
Right.
They turned the ball over, and unfortunately, we weren't able to take advantage of those two turnovers.
Right. Yeah, it's a chess game, isn't it? I mean, between one set of coaches and the other, and then obviously it's capitalizing on opportunities, which is sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Obviously. Yeah. Another exciting feature that we'll be unveiling on our Main Street TV local sports break is the question of the week. Each week, we'll be choosing one question submitted by you, our viewers, to ask Coach Hunt. To submit your questions, subscribe to Main Street TV on YouTube and comment on this or any other of our local sports break videos, or follow us on Facebook or Instagram and comment on any of our local sports break posts. Then tune in each week, Thursdays at 7 p.m. on our Main Street TV YouTube channel to catch the new episode and maybe hear your question asked on the air. Let's switch over to some of your players. You mentioned a couple of the guys that had some really good games. Who are some other guys that, maybe didn't do anything that a fan would consider spectacular, but you guys as coaches felt did really well Friday night?
Yeah, I mean, I thought our two tight ends played really well. Jonah and Eli had great games. Jonah Arms, Eli Elkins. They have just continued to get better and better. It's been super impressive for sure. Caleb Reeves is an outside linebacker, number 35. We've kind of played him on the weak side. But him and Matthew Covert, I think, have led our defense, inside linebacker. And so those two guys have been really, really stinking good. And they have kind of been the glue, I think, on defense. And first-time starters,
Right.
They've been healthy, but they are fast. They are physical for their size, and they run to the football. And I tell our guys all the time, it's one of the old Tennessee maxims, sort of, but it's something that I use before the game as well. And it's just basically that the ones who hustle the most will make the most breaks,
Right.
and you can't, some people would call, hey, the fumble, they fumbled it and, it bounced right to Maryville. Well, if that guy doesn't run to the pile, it's
Right.
not going to bounce right to him.
That's right.
And so I think I tell our guys all the time, you make your own breaks, be the one that hustles to make them. And those two guys kind of embody that, I think. So they deserve a lot of credit, and they've done a great job. And there's others as well, for sure. But we're going to keep piecing this thing together and see if we can't get something going.
And Jonah's number 44, right?
That's correct.
Yeah, he was the guy that I think last week you said he'd had was it a sprain of his ankle or?
Yeah, had a big contusion on his leg and didn't practice most of the week, and suited up and played Friday, and super impressed.
Yeah, hard-nosed kid. I noticed that. Right. He's definitely a hard-nosed kid. How about your quarterback? I mean, how much do you think obviously this was the first time he actually played the entire football game. So how much will that help him going into the rest of the season, you think?
Oh, you cannot replace experience. You can't teach it. You can't give it to him in the preseason. You just got to get out there and play. And you've got to make mistakes, honestly.
Right.
So that you can be coached, and that's our job for sure, is to not make the same mistakes. And we made plenty of them Friday night, but he also made some pretty good plays. And
he did, yeah.
And Graham is a great kid, tough kid, hard nosed. He's a good leader. I think very kind, and just an encourager. And I just really appreciate that from today's perspective. I think is super refreshing and healthy to have on your team. And so he's easy to pull for. He's easy to get behind. And no matter what happens, he's a team guy, and he's going to give us his best. And that's what I love about him. And so I think he'll continue to improve. I don't think there's any question about that. And so, I'm excited for him and for, the potential that we have on offense, even though, we've been missing a bunch of our guys.
Sure. Yeah. And I think fans don't understand, you mentioned experience, how important that is. You can scrimmage as much as you want. You can have live practices as much as you want. But until it becomes a live game, the lights come on and it's live, you really don't know what you're in for. You know what I mean? That's as a player, it takes those live games to really get yourself ready. Okay, so now let's move forward and talk about this coming Friday night. Obviously, the thing about football is, right, you got to put the last one behind you and move on to the next one. So you've got Science Hill coming up Friday night at home. Science Hill, a team that Maryville's very familiar with. I mean, ever since the move to 6A, you guys have played them either in the regular season or any of the first 3 rounds of the playoffs. So you know that team pretty well. Tell us a little bit about what they do. I know I watched a little bit of the film. They run pretty much the same offense that you see from most teams these days. But what are some of the things they do well that you'll have to be ready for?
Yeah, they kind of got a triple-headed monster like a lot of teams, hope for, in that their quarterback's very athletic, running back's a good player, and they've got a receiver who can go. So, 3 guys that can be scary in space if we don't tackle well. They Coach Stacy Carter, their head coach, I'm a fan of. We're good friends. He's a great guy, and he does a great job getting those guys to play hard. They've always had good players. Last year, they had one of the best players in the state. Last name was Moon, number 5. He's at Maryville College now, for playing as a freshman.
Right.
But he was so electric. I'm so glad he's not there anymore. But they've replaced him, and they play an odd, kind of base out of an odd look on defense, and they like to mix up coverages based off the tendencies of the team that they're playing. They'll play one of their safeties in the box, almost like a third Mike linebacker.
Okay.
Which it's what it does is it muddies up all of your blocking schemes.
Right.
Who's going to block the extra hat?
Right.
And you count him as do you play it like a 4-4?
Right.
And account for him in the box, or are you just going to let him try to make the tackle? I mean, it makes it difficult for sure.
Right.
Without giving away what we're going to try to do.
No, sure.
But yeah, he makes it tough, and when they do that, they're good enough at corner and safety to either man up or play cover 3. Just play 3 deep and keep it in front of you and make you find the holes amongst all those guys in the middle. But they've got some good players in the box as well. And so offensively, who's going to touch it. We don't know who's going to how they're going to do it, but we know one of those 3 guys is probably going to have the ball in their hands, which any smart coach would do because they can make you pay. Quarterback runs it well. Which is also something that he gets out of. He extends plays and then kind of create on the fly, which that's hard to prepare for.
Yeah, it is. No, it really is. And they've been a team that's, they've been a pretty successful football team over the years. I mean, they've had their bad years, but they usually get in the playoffs and they usually make a little bit of noise. I mean, I know they've made it to the 3rd round a few times. So how do you let me approach this subject this way. Obviously for your kids, right? I mean, you've gone over the adversity you've had. We've talked about it being like a week 1 every week. And I know your kids in the back of their minds are saying, what's the next shoe that's going to drop? Hopefully nobody else gets hurt. How tough is it for a coaching staff to deal with the emotions of the kids? And what I mean by that is, I'm sure there's a lot of football teams around the state that are thinking, well, Maryville's done now. There's blood in the water from a lot of these teams. So how do you get your kids to say, hey, let's put all that behind us. Let's just go out there and execute play after play. I mean, as a coaching staff, how do you do that?
Well, that's a great question, Ralph. And I certainly the last 2 weeks, as we continue to instill and hammer home the basic principles of what you just said, I worry that I turn into a liar because you promise them it's going to get better.
Right.
And what if it doesn't,
Right.
And what if somebody else does get hurt,
Right.
And what if our luck doesn't start to turn, which is things that we've said, hey, it'll turn eventually. And that's us trying to be positive for sure and give them hope. But I think that our kids still believe that. And the reason is because of the relationships that we have built with them. If they took us to be liars in the preseason or in the past, right, and we were telling them, hey, it's going to get better, you got to keep working hard, we'd have already lost them by now.
Sure. Yeah.
And because they are still fighting and still working really hard and they're still giving us everything they've got, I think it's because our coaches have our players trust.
Yeah.
And because they trust us and they know that we love them and care for them, they also believe the same things that we believe, is that we're really close to winning a bunch of football games. And the reality is, Bradley probably has the best player in the state of Tennessee. They're one of the top ranked teams in 6A and the entire state.
Right.
And we went down there and lost by 8.
Right.
All the adversity we've had. And then we turned around and played the defending 5A state champs, and very well could be the 5A state champs this year, and lost by 7. Both those games we had the ball with a chance to tie. So it's like, regardless of everything we've gone through, we're pretty doggone close. And we've been really green in those games. And like I said, I just can't say enough about how hard our kids have continued to play, even the ones that have been thrown into the fire without expectations, but also how tough our coaches have had it and continued to try to figure out ways and be flexible and make decisions on the fly that we think is going to better the football team.
Yeah, excellent. I think that's a great answer, and I think that pretty much says it all. Okay, final question from our fans' perspective. As a play caller, how do you go about calling your plays? In other words, what are you looking for? I noticed the fans who watch the game can see where your quarterback might make a fake snap count and then everybody kind of looks over to the sidelines. So talk a little bit about, generically, how you go about calling your plays as a coach. What are you looking at before you call your play? And are you thinking 2 or 3 plays ahead?
Yes, we are. A lot of that game planning happens throughout the week, and you kind of got what you like in certain positions in the game versus the defensive looks that they've given us from the past. So you've got your play starters, your drive starters,
right?
That you like, start a drive with, and then your kind of first and second down calls, which in high school are pretty much the same,
right?
Unless you're backed up or unless you're in the red zone. So you've got your red zone calls, you've got your third down calls, and your third down's broken down by short, medium, and long, essentially. And it's not, and that's the little piece of paper that I hold has those reminders on there. But it's not set in stone by any means. And so for me, and this is something that I tried to learn from Coach Quarles, it's always been kind of a gut call. You get into a game and you try very hard to get into a rhythm. And there's some games where we get there and it's like we can't be wrong. And when you experience that, it's so much fun to call football games when you find that rhythm and you really know what the defense is going to do, and you can predict 2 or 3 plays ahead what you're going to call and how that's going to be set up. There are also games where it feels like nothing you call is working, and the defense might either be a step ahead or they've got a guy that we just cannot block or stop, whatever the case may be. That's disrupting what we're trying to do. And then the last thing that's tough to predict is you can have a great call and you just don't execute.
Right. For
whatever reason, we're just a second off. We have a penalty. We're a second early on a throw, whatever the case may be. And that's tough because then you got to overcome. All right. We just called something great. We just didn't execute it, which is still probably the coach's fault because maybe we didn't practice a certain look that they gave us, against that play. So, we take a lot of, we're very self-critical of this staff is in that, when we succeed, it's because our kids are out there performing at a high level. And when we don't, it's our fault for not getting them ready, and that's the way I think as a coach, you got to look at it, because we wouldn't do anything if the guys weren't out there making plays. Yeah. And so they deserve all the credit for the success that we have, but that's kind of how the game is called. And I certainly have a lot of help on this offensive staff. They're phenomenal coaches and can give great feedback and ideas and make calls even in game themselves that work out tremendously.
Are you a proponent of, I know some coaches like to have like a certain amount of scripted plays, right? Where they'll run certain plays out of certain formations just to kind of see what the defense will do or how they'll react to it. And then maybe they'll come back later if it's a successful play and they'll use that. Are you a proponent of that, or is it more just a feel thing?
Yeah, we definitely script early in the game and in the second half, typically sometimes. Um, but it's nothing in stone. And, as a high school coach, you can't be, well, this happens in college all the time too. Some coaches are scared to death to run the same play twice, or certainly not twice in a row.
Right, right, right.
And it's like, don't be so concerned. And I had to learn this early on in 2017, my first year as a head coach and a play caller at the varsity level was don't worry about checking all the plays off the box. Just because you practiced it all week doesn't mean you have to call it.
Right.
Call what works.
Right.
Call what's working. And there's been years where you worry about who's touching the ball, if somebody getting it enough, and
right.
And at the end of the day, you've just got to play football.
Right.
And the best players, they always rise to the top. And so, get the ball in their hands, and that to me, who's doing it is way more important than what they're doing.
Correct.
Scheme's important, but it is not more important, than how good what are they doing? Are they doing what they're good at? Excuse me.
Right. Right.
You got to have guys doing what they're good at. We can have the greatest, X's and O's on paper in the world, but if our Jimmy can't execute whatever we're asking him to do, if that's not what his strength is, it's not going to matter. We're not going to execute it against another defense. So it's important that we're doing, what the strengths of our kids are, and that's honestly that's where we're battling right now. As we move kids in and out, we have an injury and somebody else comes in. Okay, now what's he good at?
Right.
And that's tough. That's the toughest part as a coach.
Right. Yeah. And it's hard to figure that out in the heat of the battle, right? I mean, that's something that's got to be figured out on the practice field. Well, Derek, thanks again for your time. I wish you the very best. We'll hook up again with you next week to review the Science Hill game. Keep the faith and keep at it. I know you will. And we'll talk to you again next week.
Thank you so much, Ralph. Appreciate you.
All right. Take care, Derek. Welcome back to the Main Street TV Local Sports Break. Hi, I'm your host, Ralph Miranda. Hope you enjoyed our visit with Coach Derek Hunt as we recap the game with West last Friday night, a tough 21-14 defeat for Maryville. The Rebels now 2-2 on the season as they go into their next game about midway through the season here. Game number 5 coming up this Friday night. We'll talk about the West team, some of the problems that they gave Maryville. Their defense, very physical, very sound, good linebackers. We'll talk some about that as well, or we did talk some about that. We also talked a little bit about their offense and some of the things they like to do well. Coach Hunt gave us insight into some of his players who performed exceptionally well Friday night. And once again, injuries bit the Rebels, and Coach Hunt talked a little bit about some of the challenges they have replacing those injured players with some guys maybe that haven't seen the field a lot or pretty young guys. And then we discussed the upcoming opponent, Science Hill, a regular opponent for Maryville since they moved to 6A many years ago, and an oftentimes playoff opponent. And Coach Hunt talked a little bit about Science Hill, the Trojans, and what they like to do on the field offensively and defensively. So all in all, a good meeting with Coach Hunt this week. Hope you enjoyed it. Make sure you stay with us next week as we recap the Science Hill game and look ahead to the following week. All that and more on the Main Street TV Local Sports Break. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week.